Hello, and welcome to the Good Girls Club. We are coming, if you are watching on YouTube, we are coming off of a treasure train, our first ever treasure train, so I am a little brain pudding, but we're gonna do our best. So we are coming. So welcome in to the Smut Hut. We are now in the Good Girls Club, and we are going to be reading, at long last, you guys finally made it to Manacled Volume 2. So, just before we get going, for anybody who is lurking or listening, a reminder about Manacled. Now, Manacled, hold on, we're gonna pull it up so it comes up. Oh, fudging a pain. I got my brain. This book, Manacled, is a fan fiction dark romance surrounding Draco and Hermione. It is also in the fandom called a Dramini fan fiction for Harry Potter. This book basically takes place, in my personal opinion, and as you go through it, as if it tags to the end of Deathly Hallows Part 2. The only difference is, it's what if the good guys did not prevail? And I think that's, if I'm gonna be honest, if Harry Potter, the OG original series, was written for adults and geared for adults, I gotta be honest, I don't think the good guys would have won. And I think this is actually much more true, and unfortunately, much more true to what would really happen if Harry Potter were real, and the circumstances surrounding Manacled, I think, is what would really happen. So where we're at, the Manacled, some of the trigger warnings, again, trigger warnings are rape, mutilation, forced marriage, degradation, forced breeding, death, war, and suicide. Viewer discretion is advised. Think a la Handmaid's Tale, so if it's not your cup of tea, I totally understand. And we are at a very, very special part right now, because we are about to start Volume 2 at long last. Volume 1 of Manacled, as you guys are already aware now, is a very uphill battle. Very uphill battle. And now the battle will finally start to pay off as we figure out what the actual fuck has been going on. So Caro, brace yourself. This is not a happily ever after. So I'm going to do a little summary of Volume 1. Obviously, Volume 1 is an entire novel in and of itself. I can't really summarize the entire thing, but I'm going to hit the most important points. So, Volume 1 of Manacled takes place at the beginning of the story. We find out our beautiful Hermione Granger has been locked in... okay, wait, let's roll it back. The good guys lost. Harry was defeated by Voldemort. And after that, defeat from Voldemort, the Death Eaters and Voldemort really essentially took over and blasted apart the Resistance piece by piece. We find out that Harry is dead. Hermione has been held in sensory deprivation and isolation in a dungeon underneath Hogwarts for 16 months, all alone. During her isolation, she was wearing these magical manacles, and anytime she tried to perform magic, the manacles would absorb her magic. So instead, what she did is she turned her magic inward, and she basically performed occlumency, which is protecting parts of your memories, your brain, inside herself. She performed magic to create almost think like little pearls that were protected, memories that were protected, even from herself. She did so many layers of protection on her own memories that even she forgot what she forgot. What ends up happening is she's pulled out of the dungeon. We find out that Voldemort is created a breeding program. Again, trigger warning. We find out later it's a ruse, that Voldemort's really doing it because he's slowly dying. But Hermione doesn't know that at this point. Hermione knows that she is about to be bred by a pure-blooded wizard, because the number of wizarding families are depreciating as the war has gone on. So they take 76 witches, because of course only witches, not warlocks or male wizards or whatever, witches, are being bred. 76 girls are assigned to pure-blooded wizards, and before they are basically put in their robes and sent away to their wizarding family, they are brainwashed by Professor Umbridge to be compliant, to not resist, and to try to get pregnant. That is their goal. So Hermione is told that she's been assigned to somebody named the High Reeve. She's whisked away, and where does she end up? At Malfoy Manor. We find out that Draco Malfoy is the High Reeve, which is basically Voldemort's right-hand guy, that he can kill and use the killing curse with absolutely, he doesn't have to slow down. He could slaughter 30 people in a row without even dropping a bead of sweat, which is very unusual because the Avada curse drains. Every time you use it, you kind of go a little mad, as you see with somebody like Bellatrix, as you see with somebody like Lucius Malfoy. As you do that curse, it takes a piece of your mind, your soul with it, but somehow Draco is fully intact. Like he seems cold and kind of like an asshole, but he's not mentally losing his mind, and Hermione at this point still doesn't know why. While Hermione is there, yes, Draco is told during her fertile window, again, trigger warning, to rape her and impregnate her during her fertile window, which is like 5 days every month. He is doing it, but he is hating it, the experience, which she is hating it too. He's vomiting, he barely touches her, and they have a very, it's looking like Stockholm Syndrome relationship where sort of Hermione is growing very dependent in her isolation. She's at Malfoy Manor. Astoria, Malfoy's wife, literally like hates Hermione, thinks Hermione is like, that Draco gives Hermione all this attention and all this compassion, and he was never even in the manor until Hermione showed up. So Astoria hates her guts. Hermione's given really nothing to read, nothing to do. So she's starting to just, she keeps, the beautiful thing about our Hermione is that she just wants to escape. She has these manacles on her that are tethered not only to her, but they're also blood bound to Draco himself. So anytime Hermione thinks about killing herself, anytime Hermione thinks about running away, anytime Hermione starts having a panic attack, Draco knows, he can feel it. They have a very painful relationship. She clearly sees that Draco's being forced to do these things, but he's also spending like a weird amount of time, and he really is taking care of her in a way that, like, we hear that the other witches who are assigned to the pureblood wizards are not being taken care of at all. We hear terrible things are happening to the witches who have been assigned to other pureblood families. So yes, she thinks Malfoy's a monster, but she's like, but he's not enough of a monster, which, by the way, I'm not reading you a Stockholm Syndrome book. Don't worry. I wouldn't give you something so low bar as that. It is much more complicated. So basically where we're at is Hermione is, being traumatized, working through some PTSD also from her isolation. We watch her and Draco have this very painful push-pull, and it all really culminates as she, is living there and under duress. She also goes through legamency, which is very important because they are trying to probe her memories and they can't get through. Voldemort tries himself, Draco tries himself, and her memories are just locked away. And the weird thing is that they keep thinking, like, we won. Why does she have memories that are worth protecting? All the Weasleys are dead. Tonks is dead. Lupin's dead. Professor McGonagall's dead. Like, what is she protecting? And even Hermione doesn't know. But here is where we're at. Montague attacks her. I mean, she is getting roughed up, our beautiful Hermione. Where we're at now is, unfortunately, maybe fortunately, maybe unfortunately, Hermione finally does, after months of being at Malfoy Manor, she does get pregnant. And what the thing is that they suspected that the magical pregnancy would bust through all of that occlumency because magical pregnancies are really, really straining for the woman. We find out that Malfoy and Hermione's baby, they look at, like, on a diagnostic, and we see that their baby has, like, an insane magical signature, like enough to like illuminate a cave. Like, it's like, it glows, and depending on how much it glows is how strong and powerful that baby magic is, and theirs is like insane. So Hermione gets pregnant, and only 9 weeks later her memories are busted open at the seams. So now all of these months of Hermione slowly remembering things like Ginny asking Hermione if she's sleeping with Snape, and Ginny needing contraceptives from Hermione, and then Hermione remembering that she was a potions mistress and a healer, the number one and most important healer for the Order of Phoenix, and that she was sent away for years to be trained. And during that time, Harry and Ron really bonded through the war, and Hermione felt very isolated and alone. I think one of the biggest things before we get into the actual chapters of Volume 2 is also Hermione being a healer is a very, very important aspect of Hermione and who she is. And I think you're going to see that a lot in Volume 2 and in Volume 3. But Hermione being a healer, because she doesn't remember very much of it, you don't see as much in Volume 1. I think you guys are going to see a whole other side of her soon. I'm really excited. And her being a healer is not only really important, it's her perspective on war that's very important. And the Order of Phoenix, none of them wanted to use dark magic, not even in Retribution. Hermione kept pushing and pushing and pushing for them to use just dark magic just to keep them safe. And they refused. Harry refused. We're not going to stoop to their level. Light will trump darkness. And as we see, it did not. And Hermione's seeing the war from the back end. She sees the screaming, the crying, the begging for their life, begging for their husband, their wife, their child as they die a horrific death. And she's begging for them to do something, and they won't. And it creates a lot of friction for Hermione in the Order of Phoenix. So I think that's where we're at. Really where we left off. Oh yeah, so Caro, it's great. So really, how are you, Isacelli? Where we left off is Hermione's memories start bust open. They pour out of her all at once, and in a flurry of memories, she's cycling through things. And it's like, picture if you were to knock papers. Let's say there's like thousands of papers on a shelf and you knock them down. They all just fall all over the place. That's what's happening to Hermione's memories. So as we get into Volume 2, which I'm so excited, this is the picture for Volume 2. You see a dragon. You see somebody that I will not share. This is Volume 2. We are about to begin Volume 2. Also, as a reminder, if you have any questions, you can always put them in chat, put them in the comment section of YouTube, or !Discord if you want to join our Discord. You can put them in the book horse section, and I will also answer any questions in our Aftercare. So here we go, Poop Coven, Volume 2. Manacled, Volume 2. Also, as a reminder, if I go like this, it means it's a flashback or a memory. Thank you for the follows, guys. I'm so grateful. If I go like this, it means flashback, memory, or it's something she's thinking about. Just remember that hand motion. So, I'm so excited. Volume 2, Chapter 26. Flashback 1. So you're going to see that a lot. Flashback 1, flashback. You're going to see a lot of flashbacks. March 2002, 3 years earlier. Nearly 6 years after the death of Albus Dumbledore. Hermione's teeth ground with frustration as she bottled antidote potions. She's just gone out of another pointless order meeting. Sometimes she wondered if she were the only one aware that they were losing the war. As she shelved the new bottles, she tucked a few into her pocket and hurried into the next room where Madame Pomfrey was bustling around. The hospital ward occupying the second floor of Grimmauld Place was eerily silent. No one currently in the room had an easily healed injury. Lee Jordan was lying in one bed. There was brain matter still oozing from his ears, drop by drop. Hermione had figured out a way to cancel the curse, but the counter charm was slow acting. She could only hope the dripping would stop within the next hour. It was doubtful his mental function would recover. The brain damage was severe and irreparable. She wasn't sure of the precise extent of it. She had to wait until he woke up. If he woke up. Most likely, assuming he wasn't completely brain dead by the time the dripping ceased, the Order would have to make a run to drop him at St. Mungo's when they could spare someone. George Weasley was seated in a bed beside his friend. He was pale with pain and despair. He had hit in the right thigh with a fast-acting necrosis curse. By the time he had been able to overcome the pain and apparate back, the rot had spread all the way up to his hip. There was no counter curse for necrosis. Hermione had barely managed to avoid his vital organs as she had to cut it off of him. She hadn't even had a spare second to stop and knock him out. His hands were still shaking, no matter how many calming draughts and pain potions Hermione had administered to him. Katie Bell lay in a bed in the far corner, sleeping. She would hopefully be released soon. Some nastily creative Death Eater had conjured a porcupine inside her chest. The quills had shredded and mangled the girl's lungs and stomach and only miraculously not stopped her heart. She had nearly drowned in blood before Hermione and Madame Pomfrey had managed to banish the creature and stabilize her. Katie had been there for 3 weeks. While mostly recovered, her entire torso was still covered in a multitude of tiny round scars. Her breathing made a faint rattling sound when she moved. Hermione went over and poured an anti-venom potion down Seamus Finnegan's throat. He'd fallen into a pit of vipers and gotten bitten 36 times before he managed to apparate out. It was only because of Wizarding Folk's immunity to non-magical injuries that he had managed to make it back to them before he had died. There were a dozen other bodies in the hospital ward, but Hermione didn't know the names of those resistance fighters. They were too injured to tell her. Standing in the room looking over the silent, injured bodies, Hermione felt lost. She had just come from another meeting in which she urged the Order to start using more effective curses when fighting. She'd been shot down. Yet again. There was a bizarre sort of optimism among many of the Order members that they could somehow win the war without utilizing the dark arts. Most of the resistant fighters still defaulted to stunning or petrifying when cornered, as though the Death Eaters couldn't cancel those hexes in a few seconds and then appear at the next skirmish to horribly kill and maim someone. There were a few who had begun using more vicious spells, mostly the ones who had been on the receiving end of a curse that nearly killed them. It was like a poorly kept secret within the resistant ranks. Everyone turned a blind eye to it, pretending that it weren't the case. Every time Hermione appeared at a high-level Order meeting, she laid out the case for why all the fighters needed to be taught more effective magic to duel with. Every time she found herself being given disbelieving looks. Apparently, being on the light side required that they fight against completely stacked odds. Never mind that their enemies wanted to kill them all and then murder and enslave all muggles in Europe. Apparently, that was still an insufficient reason to kill Death Eaters in self-defense. The response she got each time was the same. She was a healer. She didn't know how using dark curses eventually corrupted a person. If Order and Resistance members made the personal choice to use those kinds of spells, it was their decision. The Order would never require it of anyone. Never teach it to anyone. Besides, someone would always blandly point out to Hermione. She hardly even knew what it was like to be out there in the battlefield facing the choice of ending someone else's life. She was always back at Grimmauld Place, acting as a healer, potion mistress, and researcher for the Order. That was where they needed her. She needed to let the people specialized in combat be the ones to make decisions about the war strategies. It was enough to make Hermione want to scream. As she stood beside Lee Jordan, seething, she heard a grating tap of wood on the ground and turned to find Mad-Eye Moody entering the room. He looked straight at her. "Granger, a word," he said. Steeling herself, she turned to follow him down the hall. She hoped she wasn't about to be scolded yet again for having the audacity to question the Order's war strategy. She didn't imagine Mad-Eye would. He was one of the few Order members who didn't disagree. Moody led the way to a small room, and once they were inside it, he turned and cast a series of complex and powerful privacy spells. Once he finished, he looked around the room carefully. His magical eye was spinning as he scrutinized every corner. After a minute, he looked down at her. He seemed oddly tense, even for a man who barked constant vigilance more often than he said anything else. He seemed uncomfortable. "We're losing the war," he said after a moment. "I know," Hermione said in a leaden voice. "Sometimes I feel like I'm the only person aware of that." "Some people can only fight fueled by optimism," Moody said slowly, "but we're running out of optimism." Hermione just kept staring at him. She didn't need him to tell her that. She knew. She was the one who had to hold people down as they died in agony from curses she couldn't reverse, who had to then walk into a debriefing room and list the dead and the injured, detailing how long recovery was to be expected to take and whether those people would be expected to fight again when it was completed. An opportunity has come up, Moody said in a low voice. He was studying her face carefully. One that could turn the tide of the war. Hermione didn't have any reserves of hope left within her to brighten at those words. Based on the context in which Moody was speaking to her, she suspected the price of it was steep enough to be questionable. Oh? As Voldemort's forces have grown, Severus's intelligence has grown and limited. He's primarily kept researching and developing new curses with Dolival. They don't inform him of attack strategies. Hermione nodded. She had noticed that over the last several months, some of the other Order members had taken it as an opportunity to begin questioning Snape's loyalty once again. We have an opportunity to bring in a new spy, someone with a high rank in Voldemort's army and is willing to turn for us. Hermione stared at Moody skeptically. Someone highly ranked wants to turn now? Conditionally, Moody clarified. The Malfoy boy says he'll turn spy to avenge his mother, with the assurance of a full pardon, and he hesitated. And he wants you, now and after the war. Hermione stood stunned. If Moody had just cursed her, she wouldn't have been more astonished. Severus thinks this offer is legitimate. Says Malfoy has some kind of fascination with you in school. There's nothing to indicate the offer was made under orders. Hermione barely registered the words as she stood reeling internally. She hadn't seen Malfoy since school. 6th year had been barely begun when he started the war by assassinating Dumbledore and then fleeing. She would hear about him occasionally when Severus gave updates on Voldemort's military structure. Malfoy had been climbing ranks steadily over the years. Why would Malfoy turn? The blame for the war could be legitimately placed on his shoulders. There was no plausible reason for such a late switch in alliance. Perhaps Voldemort's power wasn't as assured as they had thought. Perhaps the ranks were beginning to break. It seemed too good to be true. But why want her? She didn't recall their school rivalry being anything to write home about. He'd always paid far more attention to bullying Harry than her. She had always been more of a footnote, an added insult because she was a Muggle-born. She'd never been the true target of his viciousness. Unless demanding her was some sort of revenge on Harry. Maybe he thought she and Harry were together. Bastard. She stood there, thinking until Moody spoke again. There's not much I wouldn't do for the intelligence he could offer, but you have to agree. He wants you willing. No, never. She swallowed the refusal, her hands fisted until she could feel the outlines of her metacarpal bones beneath her skin. I'll do it, she said, not letting her voice waver. Provided he doesn't do anything to interfere with my ability to aid the Order, I'll do it. Moody studied her carefully. You should think more about it more. You can have a few days. If you do this, you can't tell anyone. Not until after the war. Not Potter or Weasley or anyone else. Kingsley, Severus, Minerva, and I will be the only Order members. Not Potter or Weasley or anyone else. Kingsley, Severus, Minerva, and I will be the only Order members aware of it. Hermione looked up at him steadily. There was a sensation in her chest as though something inside her were shriveling and dying, but she didn't let herself attend to it. I don't need more time to think, she said sharply. I realize what's being asked. The sooner we get the information, the better. I'm not delaying that so I can have time to mull over or dread a decision I've already made. Moody nodded sharply. Then I'll send word you agreed. Removing the wards from the door, Moody tramped out, leaving Hermione alone to absorb what she just consented to. She wasn't sure what she felt. Like crying? That was her most immediate desire. It felt as though Moody had dropped the war on her shoulders. But also, hope. Maybe. in so much as it was possible to feel hopeful after essentially agreeing to sell herself to a Death Eater as his war prize. Hermione hadn't felt hopeful in a long while. Somehow, up until Dumbledore died, and even a bit afterwards, she had thought the war would be simple and short. Harry had escaped death so many times in school. He, Ron, and she had beaten so many impossible odds. So, she had thought that being clever, being good, that friendship and bravery and the power of love were enough to win the war. But they weren't. Being clever wasn't enough. The goodness in her was being ground to dust under the weight of all those lives lost or ruined with nothing to show for it. Yet friendship didn't stop someone from dying, screaming in agony. Bravery didn't win a battle when your enemy had a multitude of methods for removing you permanently from the war, and you were trying to beat them with the petrification hex. Love hadn't yet defeated Voldemort's hate. Every day the war stretched on seemed to make the odds shrink a bit more. Harry was breaking under the pressure and guilt. He was so thin and exhausted she was afraid he'd crack any day. He kept withdrawing further and further into himself. The death of Dumbledore so shortly after the loss of Sirius seemed to have knocked him off kilter in a way he'd never fully recovered from. Every death and injury among his friends seemed to prod him a little closer to the precipice she wasn't sure he could come back from. Harry was clinging to the hope that somehow the war would end in such a way that life could be normal afterward. It was that impossible belief that continued to carry him forward. He was the one who insisted most adamantly that the Order and the Resistance never use dark magic. If they did that, he argued, there would be no going back. They'd be tainted by it for the rest of their lives, no better than the Death Eaters. So, Hermione was forced to watch the Order and most of the Resistance side with him, and then watch her friends die in her hospital ward. They were relying on Harry. If he despaired, he'd break altogether and give up. The Order was in a desperate need of an edge, a bit of information, to know before a raid hit, where vulnerabilities lay, anything. Malfoy could give them that. He'd been personally trained by his Aunt Bellatrix before she died alongside his mother. He'd climbed high. Now he made an offer that they couldn't refuse. That she couldn't refuse. Clearly he knew, acting like a king demanding a tribute. Because he was fascinated with her? She mulled it over. If Severus hadn't corroborated it, she would never believe such a thing. To avenge his mother? For a pardon? For her? Both now and after the war? Which was the true motive? Were any of them? Or was there another angle he was playing? His mother had been dead for over a year in a freak accident alongside Bellatrix Lestrange when a Death Eater tried to stop Harry and Ron from escaping Lestrange Manor. It wasn't really either side's fault that she died. If her death had ended Malfoy's allegiance, it would have happened then, not a year later. Not after he'd used the void his aunt left to climb into an even higher position of power. However, wanting a pardon seemed odd. Unless there were some incredible odds she wasn't aware of, the likelihood that the Order could win seemed slim at best. So, because of her? Perhaps he had hated her more than she had known. Or lusted? She shuddered with revulsion and tried to shove that thought away before catching herself and forcing herself to stop and consider it. If wanting her was his motivation, the opportunity rested on more than merely her consent. Once he'd had her once, or maybe a few times, if it was fueled by revenge, he'd get tired of her. Perhaps it was just a game to him. Play spy for a little bit, get a chance to bring her to her knees, knowing she'd crawl for him if it meant saving Harry, saving the Order. And then, once he had what he wanted, he'd turn back, cast her aside and watch them all die? Her throat contracted, and she felt like she might be sick. She forced away her horror and ignored the retching, twisting sensation in the pit of her stomach. She had to find a way to fascinate him, to hold his attention and interest. Would it even be possible? She drifted out of the room, feeling frozen, and went back to the hospital ward. The room was silent. Poppy, do you need me right now, or is it all right if I go out? She asked quietly. Of course, dear, you should go rest. You've been on your feet for 12 hours now, Pomfrey told her gently. If anything happens, I'll call for you. Hermione fidgeted with the bracelet on her wrist. It carried a protean charm that the Order used to summon her to the safe houses where she was most urgently needed. She left the hospital ward and headed up to her room. She had no intention of resting. She went and changed into fresh clothes and then went out to the front steps and apparated away. The Wizarding World didn't have what she needed. She made her way to the nearest Waterstones. She browsed through the sections, picking out books from the philosophy section, from the psychology section, from the relationship section, and the history section until she had a large armful. The female clerk who rang up the pile quirked an eyebrow as she scanned the titles. Several histories and biographies of concubines and female spies, a thick guide to sex, the art of war, the art of worldly wisdom, The Prince by Machiavelli, Influence, Science, and Practice, a book on body language. It was admittedly an odd selection. They're for a uni essay, Hermione lied impulsively, feeling the need to explain herself. A few of them will be handy for personal use too, I reckon. The clerk gave her a saucy wink as she put the books into a bag. Hermione felt herself blush, but forced herself to laugh. Well, I am buying them, she quipped, but the words tasted like sand in her mouth. If you come by again, you have to let me know how this essay goes over with your tutor and whether any of these end up useful for extracurricular activities. Hermione nodded awkwardly as she paid and carried the bag out of the store. McGonagall's face had flashed before her eyes as at the girl's words. Minerva knew too? But Moody had been the one chosen to speak to Hermione. She wondered why. She felt slightly ill as she looked at the selection of books she now owned. She wanted a cup of tea. Well, actually she wanted to crawl into a hole and die there, but tea was her second choice. She found a shop nearby and fished out the book whose title least unsettled her while she waited. Work toward your goals, indirectly as well as directly. Life is a struggle against human malice in which wisdom comes to grips with the strategy of design. The latter never does what is indicated. In fact, it aims to deceive. The fanfare is in the light, but the execution is in the dark. The purpose being always to mislead. Intention is revealed to divert the attention of the adversary. Then it is changed to gain by the end of what was unexpected. But insight is wise, wary, and waits behind its armor. Sensing always the opposite of what is to sense, and recognizing at once the real purpose of the trick. It allows every first hint to pass, lies in wait for a second and even a third. The simulation of truth now mounts higher by glossing the deception and tries, through truth itself, to falsify. It changed the play in order to change the trick, and makes the reason appear the phantom by founding the greatest fraud upon the greatest candor. But wariness is on watch, seeing clearly what is intended, covering the darkness that it was clothed in light, and recognizing that design most artful, which looks most artless. In such fashion, the willingness of Python is matched against the simplicity of Apollo's penetrating rays. Hermione gnawed her lip as she poured herself a cup of tea and contemplated Malfoy again. Her hand wandered up to her throat, and she nervously played with the chain of her necklace, twisting it in loops around her fingers. Then she rummaged through her bag and used her wand superstitiously to transfigure her quill and a parchment into a pen and a small notebook. The notebook was crammed with notes by the time her pot of tea was empty. As she stuffed the books into her expanded satchel, she recognized the situation in which she found herself. She could not walk into it with any assumptions. If she did, she would likely overlook something. After nearly 6 years as a Death Eater, Malfoy was likely a highly accomplished manipulator. Severus reports on the goings-on of Voldemort's inner circle indicated that it was a ruthless political environment. Voldemort was a cruel master and unsparing in his punishments. Death Eaters had little loyalty to one another. They were eager to cut down those ahead of them if it helped secure their own places or access greater power and protection for themselves. Malfoy's offer could easily all be a ploy to climb even higher, to become a double agent for Voldemort in the same way that Snape acted as one for the Order, to feed them false information at a crucial point that could lead to their downfall. However, Severus was supporting the idea, apparently of the opinion that Malfoy's offer was legitimate. She would have to speak to him. She wanted to know exactly what he had noticed to believe it. She slipped into the alleyway and apparated back to Grimmauld Place. As she made her way up to her room, she noticed Lavender Brown leaving the room Ron shared with Harry and Fred. Ron and Lavender weren't exactly in a relationship per se. Ron had about 5 girls that he cycled through based on availability, following missions and skirmishes. The war had made him angrier and more tense. He was constantly on edge as he strategized raids and skirmishes. His talent for wizard's chess had translated into a talent for war strategy. He tended to take every casualty as his personal responsibility. If he wasn't shagging someone, he tended toward explosive bouts of rage. Everyone had different coping mechanisms. Neville Longbottom had Susan Bones smoked so much boomslang in the attic they reeked of it even after a smoke banishing and freshening charm had been applied to them. Hannah Abbott bit her nails until they bled. Charlie had a hip flask that Hermione suspected had an undetectable expansion charm on it, given how his poison of the day never seemed to run dry. Harry smoked cigarettes and habitually found his way into underground Muggle fight clubs. Hermione hesitated in the hallway, staring after Lavender for a moment before going over and knocking lightly on the door to the bedroom. "It's open," Ron called. Hermione peeked in and found Ron pulling on his shirt. "Everything all right?" he inquired. "Yes," she said awkwardly. "I was just wondering if you could tell me what happened when the Lestrange Manor burned down. I was doing some spell research. It was Fiendfire, wasn't it?" Ron gave her an odd look. "That was a while ago, but yeah. After Harry and I got caught by those snatchers, I got him on the face with a stinging hex so they didn't recognize him right off. They took us to Bellatrix, and her sister was there too. This is in the movies, by the way, but Hermione's not there. That was a while ago, but yeah. After Harry and I got caught by those snatchers, I got him on the face with a stinging hex so that they didn't recognize him right off. They took us to Bellatrix, and her sister was there too. They sent off for Malfoy to come identify Harry, but they called Voldemort. But before he got there, Luna had got word back to the Order, and she, Moody, Tonks, and Charlie showed up on that dragon and smashed right through the bloody window." He ran his fingers through his hair, and Hermione noticed with a pang that it had streaks of gray in it. Anyway, it was just nuts after that. Spells were flying, and Crabbe, I think, tried to stop us with Fiendfire Curse and lost control of it. He was always an idiot. It burned down the whole place in minutes. We probably would have been killed if not for Charlie's dragon. But we couldn't grab Luna. She was too far away. One of the fire chimeras swallowed her. As he spoke, Ron's expression grew far away and haunted. "And that's how Bellatrix and Narcissa died too?" Hermione prodded casually. "Yeah. They probably could have apparated out of the manor if they'd realized in time, but Crabbe was standing right behind them when he cast it. It hit them first, which is probably why he lost control. Probably freaked when he realized how fucked he'd be killing Bellatrix." "Probably," Hermione said, nodding. "Fiendfire is not a joke, Hermione." Ron was staring at her seriously. "I know you're always going on about wanting the Order to start using more dangerous spells, but just because it's not dark magic doesn't make it any less serious. If you want to try to push for using Fiendfire on the battlefield, I'm going to be the first to shut you down." Hermione pressed her lips together, and her grip on the knob tightened until it rattled faintly. She eased her hold of it. "I'm not an idiot," Ronald, I just need Ashwinder eggs for potion making, and I'm trying to decide what the best fire spell will be. It was a ridiculous lie, but it had been years since Ron had brewed a potion. Oh, well, probably not fiend fire. She nodded sharply in agreement. Well, I've got some more research to do then, she said, and withdrew from his bedroom. As she pushed open the door to her own room, Harry and Ginny sprang apart looking guilty. Sorry, Hermione apologized. Am I interrupting something? No, Harry said quickly. I was just asking Gin for some details about the mission she and Dean got back from. He left the room quickly. Hermione eyed Ginny. Mission details? Ginny blushed. We were just talking. He still won't. He just comes to talk sometimes. Harry and Ginny had been dancing around each other for years. Their interest was obvious, but Harry refused to get into a relationship. He said it was too dangerous, that it would paint a target on Ginny's back. But anytime Ginny dated anyone else, Harry's tendency to sneak out into Muggle London and return home with missing teeth, a broken nose, split knuckles, as well as a fractured eye sockets and ribs tended dramatically to increase. Ginny hadn't dated anyone in over a year. Like a black hole, her availability seemed to drag Harry in toward her. He couldn't seem to keep away from her, but he also couldn't bring himself to acknowledge his interest. Well, at least he's talking to you, Hermione murmured. Hermione and Harry had drifted apart. Her urging about using dark magic was seen as a lack of confidence in him and Dumbledore, possibly even a betrayal. Although neither Harry nor Ron would actually use the word, every time she said anything on the subject of using the dark arts, he barely spoke to her for days. She shoved the thought away. She couldn't think about it. She had far too much to consider already. So, that is the end of chapter 26. We are going to begin chapter 27. We are going to begin chapter 27. And we are going to do flashback number 2. We are going to be in Flashback City for a while, so buckle up as the story unfolds. Flashback 2, chapter 27. Get another sip. March 2002. Hermione pored over the books she'd bought during every spare minute she had. She transfigured them to resemble texts about arithmetic, ancient runes, and healing, and no one even blinked to find her plowing through them while brewing, during the quiet moments in the hospital ward or during meals. She wasn't sure if any of the information would actually be useful, but she was completely at a loss at how else to prepare. Books were the only resource she had. So she read and brainstormed and worried and found herself snapping defensively at people. I'm sorry, Fred, she said, wincing when he stopped by to visit George. He had tried to lighten the mood by recommending she provide a naughty nurse routine while caring for his brother. Hermione, abruptly finding the subject matter sensitive, exploded at him and nearly slapped him across the face. She looked away. I haven't been sleeping much lately. It was a pathetic excuse. No one was sleeping much and hadn't in a long time. No matter the safe house, there were always a few people up at any hour, playing cards, smoking, or doing anything else to while away the long night hours. Harry was almost always among the insomniacs. He seemed to exist on an impossibly insufficient amount of sleep. He wasn't even sure anymore if it were the nightmares, he wasn't even sure anymore if the nightmares were Voldemort or just his own stress and guilt. When he'd start walking into walls and standing and staring blankly off into space, Hermione would drag him into the hospital ward and dose him with a dreamless sleep. Hermione had her own nightmares, mostly of Harry and Ron dying while she tried and failed to save them. The faces of the dead haunted her too. All the people she hadn't been quick enough, hadn't been clever enough, hadn't been skilled enough to save. Colin Creevey often appeared in her dreams. Colin had been the first person who died under Hermione's care. It was shortly after Voldemort seized the Ministry, before the Order had been forced to abandon Hogwarts. Madame Pomfrey had stepped out to buy new potions when Colin were rushed in. Harry had been there, keeping Hermione company during what had been a quiet afternoon. Colin had been struck by a flaying curse. There was no counter curse for it. Hermione couldn't knock Colin out. The curse forced him to stay conscious. Stupefy, dreamless sleep, even drought of living death. None of it worked. The curse tore through and kept him conscious. Hermione tried everything she could think of to reverse it, to slow it, to stall it. The skin kept cutting away. Colin kept screaming. If she restored the skin somewhere, it flayed itself again. If she didn't replace the skin, the curse moved deeper into the muscle and tissue. The curse didn't stop until it reached his bones. Colin Creevey died surrounded by a pile of wafer-thin layers of his flesh and a pool of blood while Hermione sobbed and tried everything she could think of to save him. He'd been a perfectly excised skeleton when Madame Pomfrey returned. Hermione never recovered from it. I'm gonna cry. She didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't pick fights, didn't have casual sex. She just worked harder and longer. I love her so much. I'm sorry, I'm gonna cry. She didn't have time to grieve or regret. There was always a new body being brought to her, and she had no time to second guess herself. She slept when she was too exhausted to dream. She stared up at Fred. It's just a bad day. He gave a tight smile. It's all right, Miney. You're entitled to have them like the rest of us. Honestly, I can't for the life of me understand how you keep doing this. Hermione turned and looked around the infirmary, feeling helpless. If I didn't, who would? The Order relied upon her being there. It wasn't a sentiment born from an inflated opinion. It was simply a fact. At that point in the war, Hermione was more specialized in healing dark magic and curses than anyone else in most of Britain. When Voldemort had taken over the Ministry of Magic, the Order had been forced to stop going to St. Mungo's. Any resistance members sent to the hospital were immediately arrested on terrorism charges and then disappeared into Voldemort's prisons. The Ministry takeover had been carefully timed. The first law enacted was the Muggle-Born Registration Act. Voldemort understood the vital role healing played in a war, and so St. Mungo's was the first place purged under the new law. All the Muggle-born and half-blood healers were quickly arrested and had their wands snapped before they could flee to the Order. Poppy Pomfrey suddenly became one of the Resistance most broadly experienced healers. Hermione had been apprenticing under her and studying intensively since Dumbledore's death. When European healers sympathetic to the Resistance had secretly reached out and offered training, Hermione had been the only person with enough healing knowledge to qualify that the Order could afford to spare. She had left everyone behind, said her goodbyes, and been smuggled across Europe from hospital to hospital to learn as much advanced healing magic as she could. She returned after almost 2 years when their hospital was compromised during a battle, and all the healers they had recruited were killed, along with Horace Slughorn. Severus had trained Hermione in potions until she'd left, and she'd continued her studies as they related to healing during her training throughout Europe. When she returned, Hermione was both a fully trained emergency healer and a medical potioner. Her specialty was deconstructing curses in order to develop counter curses. The first counter curse she invented was for the flaying curse. With Voldemort's curse development division constantly debuting new experimental spells during every battle, the need for her was desperate. Hermione trained as many Resistance members in healings as were willing to learn. Unfortunately, healing magic was a precise and highly subtle art. It required tremendous attention and devotion to achieve success. The Order tried to include at least one person with field healing abilities in every skirmish in order to try to keep fighters alive long enough to get back to the infirmary. But Because of the high demand to deploy them, field healers were overworked and had the Order's highest fatality rates. Most fighters preferred to spend their free time drilling more defensive magic rather than believe that they'd need to know anything more than basic magical first aid. The stubborn optimism it revealed made Hermione shake with frustration when she allowed herself to think about it. The Order simply did not have enough people to utilize many of them well. The failures in leadership trickled down and infected the entire resistance. They'd been unprepared for the war. Dumbledore's death had effectively cut the legs from under them, and they had been struggling to survive since then. Malfoy had done that. His murder of Dumbledore had crippled them, doomed them. Now he was trying to appear like some twisted savior, willing to staunch the wound he'd opened. Hermione hated him more than she'd hated anyone but Voldemort. Anton Donovan, the head of the Curse Development Division, was a close third. Malfoy had started the war, caused all the hurt, and now she was required to swallow all her loathing and be willing. The dread since her initial conversation with Moody was already swallowing her. She didn't know how to stop hating Malfoy. She didn't think she was good enough an actress to be able to pretend that she had. The thought of being in the same room with him without trying to curse him, to punish him for everything he was responsible for, she wasn't sure if she had the self-control. Hermione gritted her teeth and pressed her forehead against a window pane while she tried to think, trying to force herself to breathe and not break something or start crying. She couldn't break down. She needed to compartmentalize. She needed to force all her hatred of Malfoy into a box and keep it somewhere where it couldn't bleed out and taint all her interactions with him. She wouldn't think clearly if she were constantly seething with rage. She needed to take a wider perspective. Utilizing his spying was more important than the short-term satisfaction of hating him. They needed him. Yet a part of her wanted to make him suffer. She couldn't help but hope that once she had what they needed from him, she could make him pay. But if they won the war at that point, the victory would be owed to him. Hermione had agreed to be the price for that. As much as she loathed him, if he saved them all, she knew she'd feel obliged to uphold her end, no matter what it was he intended to do to her. She suddenly felt nauseated. She was shaking and simultaneously hot and cold. She pulled her forehead from the glass. Her breath had created a circle of condensation on the window. After a moment, she reached out with a fingertip and drew the rune Thuraz, the force of destruction and defense, hardship, introspection, and focus. Beside it, she drew its reversal. It's Merkstav, for danger, betrayal, evil, malice, hatred, torment, and spite. Herself and Malfoy. She watched the runes vanish as the condensation evaporated back into the air. She turned back to her books. Moody found her that evening. "We have a time and a location." "Where?" "Forest of Dean, Friday, 8 in the evening. I'll scout it out and apparate you to the address for the first time." Hermione nodded, meeting Moody's eye. There was a bitter part of her that wanted him to remember the moment, to drive into his memory what she looked like before. He seemed to hesitate before his expression hardened. "You need to keep his interests as long as you can." Hermione's mouth twisted, but she nodded. "I realize that," she said, running a fingertip along the edge of her book until she felt the crisp pages were about to cut into her. "I'm not sure if I can, but I'll do my best. Is there any chance I could speak to Severus before Friday? I have some questions for him." "I'll set it up," Moody said. Then he turned and left. Friday. 2 days away. So little time to prepare, but so much time to dread. She hadn't eaten since her first conversation with Moody. Couldn't bring herself to. Every time she tried to take a bite, her throat closed. She'd been living off of tea. Hermione closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe evenly. She snapped the book she was holding closed and focused on her occlumency. According to Severance, she had a talent for it. She slipped through her own memories and thoughts, sorting and organizing them. She bolstered the walls around the most important, order meetings, the Horcruxes. Then she shoved away all the memories she had tried not to think about. There were so many memories of people dying inside her head. She pushed them into the back of her mind and tried to squash them so she couldn't hear the dying screams that they were filled with. She filtered her hatred of Malfoy out and packed it carefully into a corner where it couldn't distract or overwhelm her. Practicing occlumency was the closest thing to mental peace she could find. It was part of what made her a talented healer. She could shutter her sympathy and empathy and simply focus on the process and procedure of healing. It seemed like it was a common trait among healers. Someday, when the war ended, perhaps Hermione could do a study on the number of natural occlumens in the field of healing. She suspected that most casualty healers had at least a bit of subconscious proclivity towards it. Occlumency was so rarely taught, most people probably didn't realize when they used it. Hermione hadn't. For a long time, she had thought she was cold. As the years of war rolled by, her growing tendency to turn off her emotions and simply be rational was stark in contrast to Ron and Harry's emotional drive. She wasn't unfeeling. She felt things, but the emotions were supplemental. They didn't decide things for her. It was always head first, heart followed. It had started after Colin died. She couldn't be like Harry. That death became a defining moment for each of them. After watching Hermione try to save Colin, Harry had become utterly convinced of the pure evil of dark magic. He became driven by what he felt was right, how he believed things were supposed to be. For Hermione, the opposite had occurred. She realized the impossible advantage that the Death Eaters had over the Order. It was her awakening to the price of failure. She became convinced that almost any means could be justified to stop Voldemort. The cost of choosing to ascribe to idyllic morals and lose was too steep. It was simply the logical conclusion. The longer the war lasted, the more good and innocent people would suffer and die. That difference in conclusion created a schism between herself and Harry. Dark magic was responsible for robbing him of his parents, Sirius, Dumbledore, Colin. They'd all been stolen away by the dark arts. That Hermione's solution was to fight with was an unthinkable to Harry. Harry was determined. They weren't going to be killers. The Order wasn't going to be like that. Love had defeated the killing curse before. It would defeat Voldemort. The cynical and pragmatic members in the Order were all but shouted down by everyone else. Even as the war grew worse, the conviction only became more firmly entrenched with each new life lost. The believers in the light couldn't abandon their position because it would force them to admit that all the deaths had been for nothing, that they'd asked people to die for an ideal that ultimately failed. Rather than face such bitter truth, they became more and more convinced that the sacrifices and losses were somehow becoming so tremendous that they had to become worth it. That the balance of the scales between good and evil would soon tip to favor them because it simply must. It made Hermione leave Order meetings ready to cry with frustration. She even resorted to writing up a presentation explaining sunk cost fallacy, irrational escalation of commitment, and self-justification theory. When she tried to explain Muggle psychology, it was brushed aside. And when she tried to push it, she was treated like she was some kind of craven monster, trying to use psychology to legitimize murder. She once spent 13 hours in the infirmary, painstakingly reconstructing Professor Flitwick's lungs. When she was called to an Order meeting immediately afterward, she went in exhausted and broached the topic of dark magic out of renewed fury. She'd been angrily informed by an equally angry and exhausted Ron that she was being a bitch and didn't even seem to understand the point of the Order. Several other members nodded. Harry hadn't, but he refused to look at her. And he'd patted Ron on the shoulder as he left the meeting. She cried afterwards. Severus had found her in a storage closet, having an emotional breakdown. After alternating between mildly insulting her and grossly insulting the rest of the order for several minutes, he managed to make her regain her composure. Flattery by way of restraint. The next time he attended an order meeting, he had given her a book on occlumency. He hadn't the time to train her, but Hermione hadn't needed training. Just reading the concept enabled her to internalize the technique. Severus later told her he suspected as much. She was a natural occlumens. It was part of why she was talented in healing and potions. She had the ability to fully compartmentalize when she needed to. After 5 years of war, Hermione felt as though her entire life had gradually become sequestered into various little boxes. Her eternally strained relationship with Ron and Harry was carefully buried in a corner where she couldn't feel it. Most of her relationships felt put away in the center of herself, in the enormous space her friendship with Harry and Ron had long filled. There was now a cavern that she felt dutifully occupied with work. After a few minutes, she reopened her eyes and resumed reading. She only had 2 days left to prepare. Minerva McGonagall unexpectedly arrived at Grimmauld Place the next afternoon as Hermione's hospital shift ended. The former headmistress of Hogwarts rarely left Scotland. After Hogwarts had been shuttered, McGonagall had undertaken guardianship of all the underage witches and wizards who were orphaned or whose parents were fighting in the war. She returned to her father's mains in Caithness, and after abusing expansion charms to an absurd degree, making it large enough to house over 100 children, she regarded anyone without parents as being her charge. With Hermione's parents obliviated and hidden in Australia, that meant Minerva regarded Hermione as being under that umbrella as well. They went to tea in Muggle London. When they had seated themselves, she stared silently at Hermione for a long time. "I had hoped you would refuse," Minerva said at length. "Did you really think I would?" Hermione asked, her voice steady as she finished pouring the tea. "No," Minerva said stiffly. "My hopes and beliefs have been separate things for some time now, which is why I said it was unconscionable. The Order needs this." There was a silence as each woman studied the other. The tension between them vibrated, like the sob of a violin bow drawn carelessly across the strings. Sharp, aching, deeply felt. After a minute, Minerva spoke again. "You were one of the most remarkable students I had the privilege to teach. Your relentlessness back in Hogwarts was always something that I admired." Minerva paused. "But?" Hermione pressed, preparing herself for the sharp critique that waited on the far side of the compliment. I'm gonna cry. I love "But," Minerva put her teacup back in its saucer with a sharp click. "The way you have carried that tendency into the war has troubled me. I sometimes wonder where the line is for you, if you even have one." Once, such a rebuke would have made a Hermione blush and reconsider herself. Now she didn't even blink. "Desperate times call for desperate measures," she said. "For extreme diseases, extreme methods of cure, as to restriction, are more suitable." Minerva's expression hardened, her lips thinning. "And what of first do no harm? Or do you think that that oath does not apply when the harm is to yourself?" Hippocrates never said it. Hermione sipped her tea with more casualness than she felt. "Primum non noversi. It was coined in the 17th century. The Latin gives it away. Besides, I'm not doing this as a healer." "That Moody is asking this of you at all makes him as depraved as the mind that conceived of it." Minerva's Scottish burr became overt from the emotion her voice carried. "I would have thought there would be limits. When does the price of winning become too steep? This is a war already waged with the blood of children. Are we selling them now too?" Hermione sighed. "I am not a child anymore, Minerva. This is a choice I'm making. No one is forcing it on me. And anyone who knows you'd agree Anyone who knows you knew you'd agree to it. Draco Malfoy knew without a doubt what you'd say when the question was put to you. Do you really think that for someone of your nature it was ever a question of choice? No more than becoming a healer or anything else I've done for them. Hermione suddenly felt drained. Making hard choices. Someone has to do it. Someone has to suffer. I'm willing to. I can bear it. Why try to force it onto someone who can't? You're so like Alistair, Minerva said in a bitter tone, then appeared to be in tears in the corner of her eyes. When he told me, I told him no. I said never. There were lines that cannot be crossed because once we ask those things, we're no better. And then he told me he wasn't telling me in order to consult. The decision had already been made by himself and Kingsley. He was simply telling me so that someone with concern for you would be aware. In case of what Draco Malfoy does to you. Minerva's voice cracked abruptly. Hermione felt overwhelmed by a surge of affection, but she forced herself not to react, not to waver. He killed Albus, Minerva said after a moment, the words trembling with emotion. I know. I haven't forgotten. He was barely 16 then. He killed one of the greatest wizards of our time in a cold blood in a hallway full of first years. Even Tom Riddle was closer to 17 when he started killing. And he started with a schoolgirl in a secret bathroom. What kind of person do you imagine Draco Malfoy is now, 6 years later? He's our best chance of turning this war around. We need this, Minerva. You see the orphans, but I see the bodies. We can't afford to waste an opportunities now. I'm not going to turn down something that can give the Order even a fraction of a better chance of winning. No single person matters more than the whole war. You would do anything to end this war. I would. James Potter used to say that war is hell. I used to agree with him, but now I think he is wrong. War is far worse than hell. You're no sinner. This is not a fate you deserve. And yet, it seems as though you're determined to try damning yourself if it means winning. War is war. Hell is hell. And of the two, this is an important line. I'm going to read it again. War is war. Hell is hell. And of the two, war is a lot worse. Hermione quoted and then smiled sadly. My father used to say that. It came from a Muggle television show. Hermione hesitated for a moment before adding, You're right. I am willing to do anything to win this war. I don't know that I'm doing the right thing. I'm sure that most people will say I'm not. I know there will be no coming back from this. Not to Harry or Ron, even if it buys us a victory in the end. But saving them is worth it to me. I've always been prepared to pay the price for the lengths I'm willing to go. I have never been blind to the consequences. Minerva didn't reply. She sipped her tea and stared at Hermione as though she never expected to see her again. Hermione met her gaze and wondered to herself whether it might be true. That is the end of chapter 27, and we are about to start our final chapter for the night of chapter 28. Chapter 28, Flashback 3. Moody sent word that Severus would be at Spinner's End late in the afternoon on Friday. Hermione got ready and hoped it would be an easier conversation than the one she had with Minerva. She and Severus had struck up a friendship of sorts during the war. It had been started by Hermione when she appeared at his door following Dumbledore's death, asking him to train her in potion making. Over the years, as Hermione's relationship with other Order members had grown fraught, they came to enjoy the mutual bitterness of each other's company. Not that they were close, neither of them had time to be friends with anyone. They simply signaled their respect for each other with small gestures. Severus, by not viciously insulting Hermione during order meetings the way he insulted everyone else, and Hermione by shutting down the ongoing suspicions of Harry and others about whether Severus was truly on the order's side since they weren't winning. When Hermione arrived at Severus's home, she found the door left ajar for her and Severus brewing in the kitchen. The steamy room was a sensory assault. Potion making had given Hermione the habit of compulsively identifying scents. The air was thick with the combined aromas of stewed herbs and tinctures, sharp and sweet yarrow and the mustiness of dried dandelion flowers, the mineral bitterness of ground roots, and burn of the grittiness of ashwinder eggs shells, and could almost taste it in the air. The tang of magic was effused through the scents, clinging to her skin and hair. "Something new?" she inquired after watching him huddle over the cauldron for several minutes. "Clearly," he replied in a snide tone as he added a drop of acromantula venom. The potion burped a cloud of sour yellow vapor, and Severus stepped back to avoid it with a faint hiss of irritation. Hermione glanced at the ingredients laid out. "Is there a new curse?" "Indeed, Doliveau has outdone himself this time. Effortless to cast and highly effective. Countering it is simple, but the damage is immediate. They'll start using it in the field soon." "What type?" "Contagious acid boils." Hermione pressed her lips together and drew a sharp breath. She'd have a lot of research to do in preparation. Acid spells had rarely appeared during battles in the past, but the effects of them were often devastating and difficult to heal. Severus added 4 drops of moon dew and then turned to stare at her. "You have 20 minutes, he said, sweeping ahead of her into the sitting room. She dawdled for a moment longer, just studying the slowly simmering potion before turning to follow him. "I hear you're sacrificing yourself for the cause," he drawled from an armchair before she seated herself. "Moody said you thought it was a legitimate offer," she said evenly. "True," he said. He didn't offer tea. "Why?" she asked. There was no point being coy. She wanted straight answers. After so many years of war, she had found Severus answered short, direct questions better than any other. "Draco Malfoy does not serve anyone," he answered. Hermione waited. "Of course, technically, he serves the Dark Lord," he said, making a dismissive gesture with his hand. "But that is out of necessity, not loyalty. His motivation is personal in nature. Whatever that motive is, he has decided that the Order can enable him to achieve it better than the Dark Lord can." Severus paused and then added, "He will not be loyal to the Order, but he'll be an excellent as a spy as he is a Death Eater. "Is it worth it if we can't trust him?" Hermione asked. "At this point, I don't think the Order has any other option. Do you?" Is it worth it if we can't trust him?" Hermione asked. "At this point, I don't think the Order has any other options. Do you?" Hermione shook her head and gripped the arms of the chair. "And I think he miscalculated somewhat when he made his offer," Severus added. "How?" "Asking for you. I think that was a mistake on his part," Severus said, staring at her speculatively. Hermione blinked. "Why?" "As I mentioned to Moody, I observed Draco had a sort of fascination with you in school. Do not misunderstand. I'm not claiming it to have been anything meaningful, much less serious. However, you were someone he noticed. You may be able to use that fact to your advantage. I don't believe he realizes it. He demanded to own me. I think he realizes it," Hermione pointed out. If he merely wanted a body to own or fuck, he could get practically anyone he wanted with little effort. You're hardly Helen of Troy. And even if you were, he hasn't laid eyes on you in almost 6 years. And you certainly weren't then. I doubt he even knows what you currently look like. On the list of grudges he likely carries now, I doubt your academic rivalry still qualifies, Snape retorted. You are not the motive for his switch of allegiance. Severus' words plunged Hermione into a state of simultaneous relief and despair. She did not want the attention of Draco Malfoy, but she needed it. She felt suddenly tempted to cry over the sheer impossibility of the mission she had. Therefore, continued Snape, his decision to add you into his demands is an opening. If you choose to take it, you could make him loyal. By what? Seducing him? Hermione asked skeptically. By holding his interest, Snape said, rolling his eyes as though she were dense. You're an intelligent enough witch. Be interesting to him. Find your way into his mind so that he starts to want what he cannot simply demand from you. You're most assuredly not going to hold him with your feminine wiles, Snape snorted as he said it. Men like Draco Malfoy are ambitious, which makes them quickly bored by anything that is easy for them to obtain. Sex is possibly one of the easiest things for him to get. Even sex with you now, given the terms he set, you will have to be more than that, and you'll have to make him see it. Hermione gave a curt nod and assurance she did not feel as Snape added, he'll have a considerable advantage of power over you. However, the fact that you hold his attention means you may still have a hand worth playing. After nearly 6 years, when he had a chance to demand anything, you were what occurred to him to ask for. You will have to utilize that knowledge carefully if you wish to equalize things and make him loyal. Malfoy isn't stupid. He'll expect it. He will. But you think I can manage it? Are you trying to fish for compliments, Miss Granger? Severus said coolly. At this point in the war, I think almost anything is worth attempting. That you have any chance of succeeding is highly unlikely. You have agreed to sell yourself in exchange for information to an incredibly dangerous wizard who has obtained most of his power by means of his own considerable intelligence. A wizard whose current motives are a mystery, even to those who have known him a lifetime. He is exceptionally isolated and mercurial, even by Death Eater standards. He did not get where he is by being easily beaten or having predictable weaknesses. There was a long pause. It appeared Snape had no further insight to offer. Hermione stood, feeling freshly demoralized. She was selling herself in a gamble with multiple points of failure. It would likely be futile. She was going to do it anyway. She hesitated, a question rising to her lips that she was almost afraid to ask. Is he? She stammered. How cruel do you know of him being? Snape stared at her with his inscrutable black eyes. I haven't known him well since your 5th year. However, bully though he was, I never considered him to be a sadist. Hermione nodded jerkily, feeling lightheaded as she turned to go. I wish you luck, Miss Granger. You are a better friend than Harry Potter will ever deserve. Severus' voice had a trace of regret in it. Hermione paused and brought her hand up to her throat, tracing her thumb along her collarbone for a moment before twisting the chain of her necklace between her fingers. I'm not just doing this for Harry, she said, Severus snorted, and she looked at him defensively. There's a whole world out there that doesn't even know they're relying on us. Besides, if we lose, what possible chance do you think I'll have? He gave a short nod of agreement. She left Spinner's End without another word. When Hermione returned to Grimmauld Place, she went into the bathroom and stared at her reflection. She was thin and tired-looking. Her skin was pale from lack of sunlight. Her features were sharper than they had been at school. A bit daintier. Hold on one second. This is a long chapter. Thank you, Quit the Build, for the raid. Thank you so much. Hattie, can you tell them what we're doing? Thank you so much. Quit the Build. Welcome on in, everybody. Sorry. She was thin and tired-looking. Her skin was pale from lack of sunlight. Her features were sharper than they had been in school, a bit daintier. Her protruding cheekbones made her look more elegant. Her eyes, well, she'd always thought they were her best feature. Large and dark, but with enough fire in them that they didn't make her look too naive. Her hair remained her cross to bear, still bushy, but it was long enough nowadays that the weight held it down somewhat. She kept it braided and pinned back to keep it out of her face when brewing and healing. She pulled her clothes off and stepped into the shower. The hot water beating down on her skin felt like safety. She didn't want to leave it, but after scrubbing herself from head to toe, she made herself shut off the water and step out. She cast a quick shaving charm on her legs and under her arms and toweled off. Wiping off the steam from the mirror, she appraised the body in the reflection critically. She'd have to hope Malfoy's subconscious interest was primarily in her mind, because she was certainly not Helen of Troy. Stress had eaten away her curves. She was bony and thin-limbed, not particularly flawed anywhere, but generally lacking in softness in the places men typically like to hold. Insofar as general sex appeal went, she was assuredly middling. It was simply not a quality she had ever had the thought or time to cultivate in herself. Dwelling on how she came across sexually, it hadn't really seemed to be pressing of importance. It had not occurred to her that the war was going to require her to offer herself as a mistress, whore, war prize, to a Death Eater. She did not bother to fuss over her underwear or clothing as she dressed. There was no point in trying to pretend to have wiles and attributes she did not. She would undoubtedly do it poorly. Trying to undertake an additional angle might cause her to exceed her limitations and reveal her hand. As she prepared to leave, she glanced in the mirror and fingered the chain around her neck, hesitating before she pulled it out from under her shirt and stared at the amulet that hung from it. The pendant of ascent. Her tiny throne rested upon deep scarlet stone, a sun disk fitted between two horns. It had been given to Hermione when she briefly studied healing in Egypt before returning to Europe to study in Austria. She pulled it off and slipped it into the beaded bag under her bed. If she died, Severus would probably know what it was. The location Malfoy had provided was in the village of Witchcroft. Moody apparated her there, and then, after glancing sharply around for a minute with his magical eye, vanished again with another pop. Feeling so viscerally abandoned that her skin hurt, Hermione walked up the gravel lane of the address, glancing around at the empty lot. Unplottable, or else a midpoint before she was directed to the real location. After glancing around nervously, she swallowed hard and resigned herself to wait. There was a stump to the side of the lane. She seated herself. After another minute, she pulled out a book, keeping her ears alert for any noise. She had read 6 pages when a sound to her left made her look up sharply. The light from a floating doorway in the empty lot suddenly appeared, and with it a run-down shack began bleeding into view. Here we go. Draco Malfoy stood framed in the door. She hadn't seen him in over 5 years. She slipped the book into her bag and walked forward. Her heart rate increased with every step. He'd grown taller and broader. The haughtiness of his school days had faded, replaced with a cold sense of power, deadly assurance. Even after she had ascended the steps, he towered over her. He was at least as tall as Ron, but he felt larger. Ron's height was always offset by his lankiness and awkwardness. Malfoy owned every inch of his stature, as though it were an additional testament to his superiority as he stared down his nose at her. His face had lost all trace of boyishness. It was cruelly beautiful. His sharp, aristocratic features were set in hard, unyielding expression. His gray eyes were like knives. His hair, still that pale white blonde, combed carelessly to the side. He leaned nonchalantly against the doorframe. He just left enough space for her to enter, so long as she brushed lightly against his robes. She caught the sharp scent of cedar in the fabric as she passed. He felt dangerous. She could feel the taint of dark magic around him. Approaching him was like walking toward a wolf or a dragon. Her whole body felt on edge as she drew nearer. She struggled against a fear that felt like it was slicing its way down her spine. A sense of ruthlessness hung around him. He had killed Dumbledore at the age of 16, and that had only been the start of his blood-stained ascent. If an assassin's blade were made into a man, it would take the form of Draco Malfoy. She stared up at him, taking him in, beautiful and damned, a fallen angel, or perhaps the angel of death. Such cliches, and yet somehow it captured him. If he was complicated or conflicted, he didn't show it. He just seemed cruel, harsh, and beautiful. Malfoy, I understand you want to help the Order, she said after she walked into the shack and he shut the door behind her. She fought against the impulse to flinch and turn sharply when she heard it click. She was alone in a house with Draco Malfoy, whom she had agreed to sell herself to in exchange for information. The calming draught she had taken immediately before leaving with Moody was far from sufficient relief to the nauseating terror crawling through her. She felt it everywhere, in her spine, in her stomach, and her hands closing around her throat as surely as if he were strangling her. She squared her shoulders and forced herself to survey the room slowly. The building seemed primarily composed of one large, empty room, hardly any furniture to be seen, 2 chairs, a table, and nothing else. No bed. You understand the terms, he said coolly when he looked down at him when she looked at him again. A pardon and me in exchange for the information, both now and after the war. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of cruelty and satisfaction as he said it. Hermione didn't flinch. Yes, I'm yours from now on. Moody says he'll act as a bonder if you require an unbreakable vow, she said, trying to keep any bitterness from her tone. He gave a thin smirk. That won't be necessary. I'll trust that Gryffindor nobility you have if you swear it right now. I swear it. I'm yours. You have my word, she said without giving herself time to hesitate. She wished she could feel triumphant that he was leaving her a way out. But if they won the war at this point, it would be because of him. She'd owe him. They all would. Until we win, you aren't doing anything that will interfere with my ability to contribute to the Order, she reminded him firmly. Ah, yes, I'll have to make sure I keep you alive until this is over, he smirked as he looked over at her. I want you to swear it, she said in a tense voice. His eyes flashed and he laid a hand across his heart. I swear it, he said in a droll tone. I won't interfere with your contributions to the Order. Then he hissed. My, you're suspicious of me, aren't you? Worried this is all a ploy on my part to get a piece of you before the war ends and you die, he speculated. Don't fret. As a token of my sincerity, I won't touch you. Yet. After all, I've waited this long to get you as my prize. I can restrain myself a bit longer. He smiled wolfishly at her. In the meantime, I'll let you go running back to your precious Order with my information and sustain myself with your delightful company. If Malfoy were trying to set Hermione on edge, he was doing an excellent job of it. As though the thought of consenting to whatever awful thing he wanted to do to her wasn't bad enough, having to keep dreading it almost felt worse. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to breathe. She slid a hand behind her back and fisted it tightly, then forced herself to open her fingers slowly, bracing herself, clearing her mind. This was better, she reasoned. The longer he waited to act, the more time she had to try to ensure his loyalty, to find a way to bring him to heel before he tried anything on her. She nodded shortly. All right, that's generous of you. He laid a hand over his heart. You have no idea what joy it brings me to hear you say that, he said with false elation. Hermione's eyes narrowed. She couldn't understand him. His true motive was escaping her entirely. She hated how disadvantaged that made her. But, said Malfoy suddenly, looking contemplative, perhaps you should give me something. Hermione stared. To warm my cold heart, he said, leering. A memory to keep me motivated. What do you want? She asked in a stiff voice. She started mentally calculating likely options. Maybe he'd make her strip or suck him off. She'd never done it before. She'd surely be terrible. Or come on her face. Or maybe he wanted her to stand there and let him curse her. Or just get to backhand her across the face in retribution for third year. You don't sound very enthusiastic, Malfoy said. I'm offended, truly. Hermione tried to restrain herself before glaring at him. Would you like me to kiss you or just stand here and let you hex me? She inquired in the most demure tone she could manage. Malfoy gave a barking laugh. My goodness, Granger, you are desperate. I'm here. I assume that was obvious. So true, he said, nodding. Well, I'm all jeweled out for today. Let me see if that mouth of yours is capable of doing anything but talking. Hermione thought she might vomit, and the revulsion must have shown on her face. Malfoy smiled cruelly. Kiss me, he said in clarification, as a demonstration of your sincerity. He smirked at her and didn't move. He just stood there, waiting for her to approach him. Hermione's whole body felt drenched with cold terror at the thought of reaching out and touching him, of having him touch her with those cold, pale, murderous hands of his, of pressing her mouth against his. Standing near him without having her wand pointed at his heart felt as vulnerable as exposing her throat to a wolf. She hesitated. How do you want me to kiss you? She inquired. Surprise me, he said, shrugging. Surprise him? Well, that was an opening, an opportunity she had to capitalize on. She analyzed him quickly. He was goading her. The entire conversation seemed to be intentionally trying to make her angry with him, to see her writhe under the power he had over her. This kiss was probably intended to seal her animosity. He expected her to be resistant and proud, unable to squash her hatred, so he could trick her into fueling her own punishment and keep her distracted by her own emotions. She couldn't give it to him. She steeled herself. She would not lose. She drew closer to him, studying his face carefully. She had never been so close to him before. For someone so eager for her, he didn't look it. His irises were contracted, his eyes mostly gray. He seemed amused. The coil of fear in her spine felt like a needle being driven down her back. Her heart was beating so forcefully it felt as though it were bruising itself against her ribs. She slid her arms up around his neck and pulled him down towards herself. He smirked and permitted it. When their lips were almost touching, she paused, half expecting to find a knife buried to the hilt in her stomach. There was a brief moment of stillness between them, breathing slowly, close enough for the air to ghost across each other's faces. His breath smelled like juniper, peppery and sharp like a fresh-cut evergreen. She studied that deadliness and coldness of his eyes. She wondered what he saw as he looked back. Murderers are still men, she told herself. Then she gave him a slow, sweet kiss. She imagined how she'd do it for someone she felt affectionate toward, sliding her hands up into his hair as she deepened it. She teased his lips with her tongue and murmured slightly against his mouth. He tasted like gin. It was clearly not what he had expected. Apparently, surprises weren't really his thing. He stilled in visible astonishment the moment their lips softly met, and after a moment jerked away from her. His eyes were darker now. Hermione wasn't sure if she were pleased or concerned by that detail. Her heart rate slowed somewhat. His amusement had vanished, and he suddenly seemed to be considering her more seriously. "You don't fight much, do you?" he abruptly asked. "No. Most of my work is outside of raids," she admitted, not willing to detail what she did. She was there to get information, not give it. "Do you know occlumency?" "Yes, Moody trained me," she lied. "I haven't had much practice, but he said I was fairly solid at it." "Well, that's a relief. It would be a problem if you were ever picked up and they found the details of this arrangement in your mind," he said with the most serious expression she'd seen yet on his face. Then he sneered. "I hope you don't mind if I check for myself just how good you are." That was all the warning he gave before driving abruptly into her mind. Hermione's shields were already up, and the force with which he drove into them was enough to make her head resound like he'd struck a gong inside of it. He kept shoving forcefully against her walls again and again until she was gasping with pain as she kept him out. Then he paused, and she nearly stumbled. "You're surprisingly good at it," he said, looking as though he actually were surprised. The compliment caught her off guard. Abruptly, the compliment caught her off guard. Abruptly, he smashed into her mind again. The brief respite had been faint. She was insufficiently braced for the renewed attack. He found a weak spot and sliced through it with the speed of an arrow. She tried to shove him back out, but he quickly moved so far into her memory she couldn't. She could barely even slow him. Then abruptly, without even pausing to look at anything in her mind, he wrenched himself back out. She nearly fell over backwards but caught herself, gripping her forehead as she gasped from the pain. "It's a common trick," he said casually, not looking as though his assault on her mind had required any effort on his part. "After an intense attack, when an occlumens think it's done, they'll relax slightly. It's a perfect opportunity to get in." Hermione was still catching her breath and couldn't respond, so he continued. "If you're ever under interrogation by a truly accomplished legamens, you'll never keep them out with the sheer strength of your mental walls. If you were a minor member in the resistance, they'd probably just kill you rather than go to the effort of getting in. But you're an order member. Potter's golden girl. If they ever get their hands on you, they'll probably bring you to me, or Severus, or even the Dark Lord himself. I'm afraid you're going to need to brush up on your occlumency skills." How? Her voice sounded rasping. She hadn't known it was possible for a mental attack to be so powerful. No wonder Harry had hated his sessions with Snape. Her mind was in agony. "The trick is letting them in," Malfoy informed her. "What?" "Put in a bit of effort, but eventually pretend to give way. Once they're in, give them false memories or distract them by feigning towards something of less importance. You'll never keep the Dark Lord out of your mind, but if he thinks you're weak, he'll assume victory. You'll have to give up something valuable enough to be legitimate. However, it's a way to keep the things that matter most hidden." "Thank you for the raid!" Hermione's brain churned as she considered it. Of course, there had to be more than just mental walls. There was no way Severus could have deceived the Dark Lord for so many years simply by refusing to allow him to access his mind. "Spend time thinking about it. If I'm looking for information on Potter or Weasley or the Order, what can you give up that will seem like the biggest secret you've got? Legamency is like setting someone's house on fire. Minds instinctively bolt to protect what's most important, to hide. You have to train yourself to do the reverse. Rush toward what doesn't matter. Practice pulling those memories around in your mind like you're hiding them. I'll try again next week." Hermione nodded. She hated the thought of him in her head again, but his reasoning was sound. It would be an invaluable skill. Malfoy Malfoy reached into his pocket and tossed something towards her. She caught it reflexively. She stared into her palm. It was, well, it looked like a wedding band. If wedding bands came in black. She looked up at Malfoy in astonishment. Your protean charm from 5th year inspired me, he smirked, and raised his right hand, indicating a matching onyx band on it. It'll burn briefly if I need to meet. Twice if it's urgent. I'd highly advise coming quickly if it burns twice. If you want to reach out, the wards here will let me know when you arrive. But otherwise, we should stick to a schedule. Is there a time you can get away without drawing suspicion? Hermione slid the ring onto her pointer finger on her left hand. It was a simple, slightly geometric band, not flashy or likely to draw attention. She suspected there was a heavy notice me not charm on it. I go out for potion ingredients early on Tuesday mornings. I could add an extra half hour without anyone paying attention. Would 7:30 work? He nodded. If I can't come for some reason, come back again at the same time that evening, he told her. What if I can't come? Hermione asked. His eyes narrowed. He was trying to determine what it was she did for the order. Well, she wasn't interested in volunteering that information. I'll wait 5 minutes and assume you can't make it. Fine, she agreed flatly. He smirked and with a flick of his wand conjured a scroll of parchment which he held out to her. My first installment, he drawled, leering at her again. She took it from him and unrolled it partially, glancing at several maps and building blueprints. I'm trusting that Moody has the sense not to use everything at once, he said. Your service will be the one of the Order's most carefully protected secrets. You're useless once your cover's blown. We won't risk it. Good, he said in a cold voice. I'll see you Tuesday then. Practice your occlumency. He vanished with a crack. That is the end of chapter 28. Good Lord. First of all, welcome so much for the raids from Quit the Build and JRB Dirt. We're about to start the Aftercare. Go through, those are longer chapters. Oh my God. We're gonna thank you so much for the follows, Gray and Rebelgasm. Thank you if you were lurking and listening. If you're very confused what's happening, it's typically on Saturdays, but typically on Saturdays we go to the Smut Hut. We're in the Smut Hut. We read 3 chapters of the fan fiction called Manacled. All of the previous chapters are on YouTube, so if you want to catch up on the Good Girls Club, go into that link and you could go watch all the previous chapters be read. The Aftercare. So I know you're still like, how is Draco Malfoy possibly going to be redeemable? Just you wait. Next thing I want to talk about is this was a information bomb. These flashbacks are an information bomb. Do you guys have any questions about what's going on so far? I feel like so far we're just sort of setting up the space. So much info in each chapter. I want to go through a couple really key points. No problem, Disco. I want to go through a couple really key points. One of the things that you will see in the flashbacks, and I think it's reiterated constantly, almost a little bit, not excessively because it's so important, but like it's going to be drummed down hard, is Hermione being a healer and all of the horrific things that she witnesses. Her constant pushing for dark magic arts to be used. Her constant feeling of isolation because nobody will heed her warnings. They are losing. They are desperate. They have to strike back. The healer notion of Manacled resonates very deeply, but I also feel like the healer, you're already getting a taste of it. It to me is a testament so much of her being resilient and relentless. And you guys know I have those words tattooed on me. And her ability to compartmentalize, her ability to, everybody else has vices. We hear Harry smokes and goes to fight clubs. We hear Ron has frequent sex with people. We hear of these characters seeking some kind of release. And no, Hermione doesn't have that. Hermione has work. She pours herself into trying to fix what the Order is not grasping. And that's going to be drilled in hard. So that's you're already getting a taste of that. Another really important thing is this, obviously this now set up with Draco. I know you're still like, what the hell? What the hell? Please, just brace yourself. It's gonna blow your mind. It was a lot of information. Yeah. So with Draco, she now is under this, like arrangement, if you will. She does not know why he asked for her. No one knows why. We also find out, I think, with the Severus information, that was really important. Severus gave a lot of behind the scenes of Draco. He's isolated, he's powerful, and he's really not loyal to anybody, and he really hasn't been. He's only loyal to his own needs. That's a really important thing. We also find out that Ron and Harry were there when Draco's mom was killed by fiend fire from Crabbe's misfiring. Narcissa dies, Bellatrix dies, the Malfoy Manor burns down from fiend fire. It's also very, very important information. I think that, like, these chapters are going to give you a lot of information. If you guys want to, like, you might have to watch the episode twice. A true Slytherin Rebelgasm. You might have to watch the episode a couple times. If you have questions as you listen, please put them either in the YouTube comment section or you could put them in chat. I think, how are you, old Bizzle man? I think that as we work through another really important, like, I don't want to give too many things and like I'm spoiling anything. The pendant that you hear that Hermione's wearing, keep that in mind. The ring that Draco has given her, keep that in mind. These are very big building blocks to the story as it unfolds. I think that right now, I think that that's a good summary of what kind of, I don't know if there's anything else from those 3 chapters, but the chapters I think get long and I think they get a lot of info. So do you guys feel good? Do you need any? I also feel like, I know a lot of you guys are like, how is this possibly going to be not a Stockholm syndrome or a forced arranged marriage? No. Just prepare yourself. Rebelgasm, I have read it before. So for Manacled is, it's a fan fiction, yes. I read it by myself once. I've only ever been able to make it through once. I'm obviously rereading it with you guys now. The story is incredibly complex, incredibly beautiful. I think the universe building, the character building, the storytelling is some of the top-notch story I've ever read. I think it is, to me, the actual canon of what the original story would be if the original story was written by somebody who was gearing it towards adults, because it keeps driving home that, like, and that's also going to get nailed into, you guys, that this concept of good always triumphs, good always triumphs, when we see all the time that is not necessarily true. And good can triumph eventually, but you have to, like, wars can't be won throwing bubblegum at each other when other people are using nukes. So that's another really big thing. So I think, in my opinion, that if you read Manacled with us, Rebelgasm, we do it again, typically on Saturdays in the Poop Coven, but we have to do a couple flip-flops. If you want to stay up with when the Smut Hut is going to be happening, join Discord or, again, YouTube. They're all on YouTube. But I think that driving in constantly of Hermione going, like, we need to do something, you're going to keep seeing that. And in my opinion, why would the good guys win? Like, the way that the story unfolds in the original series, it's kind of nuts if you think about it, Like, if you think about it, and you're going to think about it as we work through Manacled, you're going to be like, there's no way they would have won. So this, to me, in my humble opinion, is canon. And I've read 3 other Hermione Draco fan fictions, and nothing is as good as Manacled. Nothing is as complex, as beautiful, as intricate as Manacled. It's special. It's very special, and it's very, very, very good. So we have a lot more to go. We're in volume 2 now. Always pay attention. Yeah, the jewelry is important in Manacled. Yeah, like, the manacles themselves are kind of jewelry-esque. The ring, the necklace. It's heavy and intense. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It is such a great, and I think because Harry Potter is such a beloved world, and also the world is already so fleshed out, I do sort of feel like it's one of those things that You think, how could it be better? How can it's better. Manacled is better. So you're gonna, every chapter is gonna be like washes of information. It's gonna be great until you finally figure out what the fuck is going on. So if you guys are good, if you don't need anything else in the aftercare, this chapter of the Good Girls Club, we did chapters 26, 27, 28 of volume 2 of Manacled. Even if Hermione agrees to everything that's happened to her in book 1, but she forgot that she agreed to it, but don't know it, that's a huge moral issue. But I still think that if the moment she is not willing, it's still rape. Forgotten plans don't matter. There is no redeeming for Draco unless it was not him doing it to begin with. Just my 2 cents. Just wait and see. Just wait and see. Just wait and see. Trust me, Andy, trust me. It's so, trust me. You're gonna go, oh my God. Like, I promise. There it is. Miles to go before we sleep. But if you guys need anything else, again, open forum on the YouTube channel episodes. If you are in the book horse section in the Discord, you could also post it there. Thank you guys for listening to this chapter of these chapters of the Good Girls Club, chapters 26, 27, and 28. Next, I believe it's actually Saturday, we will be doing chapters 29, 30, and 31. I love you. Thank you for being a part of the Good Girls Club, and I'll see you on the other side of the smut hut, baby.